Hi, my name is Ashley, and thank you for tuning in today. We're going to be talking about the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain and how that is turned into modern day Halloween. So, Samhain runs from the evening of October 31st to the evening of November 1st. It is considered to be the start of the Celtic New Year, and it marks the end of summer. As you can see, each of the Celtic nations has its own name for the festival, and as we'll come to see, they also have their own practices, but they all refer to the same festival of Samhain. At this point, the last of the harvest has been gathered, and it approaches the start of winter and the end of summer. Samhain is considered one of the most important festivals of the year. Um, as we'll see, a lot of the practices and customs um, really make Samhain a really social time. I'll mention this at some point, but it a lot of them kind of mimic um, the Thanksgiving in the United States. That's the family gatherings and the meals. Celtic mythology places a lot of heroic deeds that have been accomplished by great warriors on the eve of Samhain. Um, just like in the United States, black and orange are associated with Samhain. Black marks the death of summer, and orange represents autumn. Um, Samhain directly translates to summer's end. Um, it is a 3-day festival, um, and some scholars believe it's 3-day festival. And um, as we will find out, it became more established as a 3-day festival once it blended with All Saints' Day in the Catholic faith. Unfortunately, not too much is known for sure about the ancient practices, since a lot of the practices predate the written history of Ireland and the other Celtic nations, and Samhain is a return to darkness. So for a little bit of history, the traditions were brought to the United States, especially from Ireland and Scotland. Um, this was especially the case from Ireland and those who were fleeing the Irish potato famine. Um, Derry in Northern Ireland has the biggest Halloween celebration in Europe. Um, these celebrations include a week-long festival that consists of fireworks, goes towards night markets, and the Carnival of Lost Souls parade. Um, as I mentioned, Samhain was absorbed into the 3-day Catholic holiday of All Saints Day, which is a 3-day holiday celebrating ancestors and saints. The Hill of Terror, which we'll talk about in a little bit, dates back to 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, which means that Samhain was celebrated before the first Celts arrived in Ireland about 2,500 years ago. Gath Kurgan is the birthplace of Samhain. This site has 240 archaeological sites that date back 500 years. Um, there's a hive of activity that is focused on the elevated temple. Um, this it is considered by many scholars to be the largest unexcavated royal complex. It's never been dug up, and it predates Ireland's written history. And it's also one of Ireland's less frequented attractions. Um, so it has 22,000 visitors a year, in comparison with more than 1 million visitors who go to the Cliffs of Moher. And it has burial grounds for the Connachta elite. Um, One of the other major Samhain sites is Tlaka, also known as the Hill of Wood. It is home to many Samhain celebrations, and it is named after the goddess of the same name, who birthed triplets at Samhain and then ended up dying. Um, it is located 10 miles southwest of Telltown and 12 miles west of Tara, which we'll talk about. It is surrounded by 16 ring forts and was considered the main center of the Druids. It is at least 3,000 years old, and locals would avoid the hill on Halloween because of all the different activity that happened. Um, as mentioned, the Hill of Terror is also very important to Samhain celebrations. The records date back to 2500 BCE. It was considered the seat of the High King of Ireland, and as such, it was one of the most important cultural centers of Ireland at one point. Um, the last recorded celebrations of Samhain at the Hill of Terror took place in 1168 CE, and it is Ireland's most famous ancient site. So, some of the beliefs surrounding Samhain. Um, this is a time where the spirits of those who had died during the previous year were granted access to the other world. Um, it was one of the 2 days of the year where the veil between the living and the other world was at its thinnest. Um, and if you put a thimble of salt on a plate, if the salt fell down, that means the person would die within the next 12 months. Um, fairies were thought to be unconverted souls forced to roam the earthly plane. Um, and bog bodies are believed to be the remains of failed kings who were killed at Samhain. Um, the darkness of winter was associated with death, and as mentioned, Samhain marks the end of summer and the beginning of winter. Um, so these beliefs kind of go hand in hand with that. Um, there's also believed that the spirits that come out are destroyed crops before they were destroyed crops before they were harvested. Um, and Samhain is really known to be a fire holiday. Um, and it is considered bad luck to allow a fire to go out on All Hallows Eve. So now we're going to talk about some of the practices and customs and beliefs in different Celtic nations. In Ireland, Samhain is also known as Nutcrack Night. This refers to the divination practice where two nuts are placed near a fire, and that tells the future of a relationship. So if you place it near a fire and you place two nuts near a fire and you designate a couple that you want to tell the future of. Um, if they if the nuts um fall apart or crack and jump away from each other, that relationship is doomed to fail. But if they come together, that relationship will be successful. Um, in Ireland, Samhain is considered a harvest festival, even more than in the United States. As I mentioned, Thanksgiving in the United States is comparable to some of the practices in Ireland, but primarily like the family meals and the gatherings. And just like in the United States, there are a lot of pranks that happen, um, and as well as Halloween rhyming, which is when young people go door to door for weeks before October 31st, and they perform a song or a poem, and they receive nuts, apples, and money, and this money would go towards buying fireworks. Um, So again, fire is a huge part of the holiday. So in Scotland, there's the practice of guising, which is just dressing up in disguise. It is also known as Galatian in Scotland, and it began in the 16th century and is part of modern day Halloween with dressing up as in costumes. Another practice is called false faces, which is masks. Young men wore masks and walked through the village streets in the dark, carrying turnip lanterns. They sang Halloween rhymes and gave performances, and they would say, "Please help the guises." And um, in response, they were given apples, nuts, coins, and again money for fireworks. Um, Witches used to be burned by lit peat torches because witches and ghosts were feared, and they feared these um, figures feared fire. And another practice that took place um, was walking clockwise around the field um, for a good year of crops. Um, and again, in Scotland, Halloween is associated with fun and revelry at the fireside. Just like in many of the other Celtic nations, there were ceremonies where young people practiced divination to predict future romance and future love. Um, One of the practices that takes place in Scotland is called Three Luggies, and this is where one bowl is filled with clean water, one is filled with dirty water, and one is empty. And these bowls were arranged on the hearth. Um, a player is blindfolded and told to dip fingers in one of the bowls. If they dip their fingers in the clean water, they are destined to get married. If they dip the fingers in the dirty water, they are going to be a widow or a widower. And if they dip their hands in the empty bowl, they will never marry. And this is a popular game even today. There was also forking for apples, where a child would stand on a chair while holding a fork pointed down towards the apple between the teeth. And the fork, if the fork was able to latch on, I guess, to an apple when the child let go, the child got to keep the apple. So moving on to Wales, it is said that ghosts appear at midnight on All Hallows Eve. Um, and church keyholes became a huge practice for Samhain. Youth in the villages would go to the churchyard where ghosts were. It is said that if they put their fingers over the keyhole, it kept the spirits out, and if they looked through the keyhole, they could see the ghosts of those who will die soon. Um, Young people often wore clothes of the opposite gender and went from house to house, singing verses and riddles. Um, Men would dress up as Grachad or hags and wore masks and called themselves hags. Um, Hags were feared in medieval Wales, so they would go out and frighten children, and were rude to adults. And because of this, this practice was stopped by police. So again, Samhain is a huge fire festival in all of the Celtic nations. A lot of bonfires were lit on hillsides to see whose bonfire would burn the longest. And oftentimes potatoes and apples were roasted over the flames, and people danced and jumped over the fire. Um, Another practice was each person would choose a stone and throw it into the fire. If if the stone was found the next day, um, the person would have good luck, and they would have bad luck if it wasn't found. Just like in the United States, apples are very popular for Samhain and Halloween, both in Wales and Scotland. Um, they would play games such as bobbing for apples, and there was also what is called Apple and Candle Night, which is celebrated in the Swansea area of Wales. So this is where a stick is hung from the ceiling with an apple on one end and a candle on the other end, and the goal is to grab the apple with the teeth. So in the Isle of Man, Thump the Night, Thump the Door Night became popular in the early 1900s, where boys threw cabbages and turnips at doors until the homeowners came out to give them money or a treat. And the Mummers play was also popular, which is reenacting old pagan beliefs, and mummers would go to door singing. Um, so in Brittany, people would avoid going out. Um, a couple of figures that were associated with Samhain were Lavendia de la Nuit, which is the washerwoman washing your shroud, and Blanco, which is the black dog, um, which is a dark figure with the scythe. Um, and people would avoid going out in an effort to avoid running into these creatures. Um, in Brittany, horses were seen as carriers of death. If you leave horses out on October 31st, death could travel via the horses. Um, the next morning, after they were left out overnight, they were sweaty and tired. Um, they were used by death the night before, and as such, the owners of the horses would give them the day off to rest. Um, mummers were also popular in Brittany. They would go door to door, and owners of the house would have to give them money, also will have bad luck through the year. Um, white linen, buttermilk, and pancakes were left on the table for the dead, and um, people on the coast would avoid going out at night because they would hear the voices of the dead at sea. Um, in Brittany, it was also a practice to remove the tripod from fire um, so that the dead don't burn themselves. And it is also a practice to walk in the middle of the road to avoid crushing dead souls. In Brittany, a lot of people go to the cemetery to talk to dead loved ones. Um, it is also important to avoid talking about Anko, which is the spirit of death or death itself. And because death was seen as kind of a taboo topic, as it is still is in the United States a little bit today. Um, and it's also a practice to avoid having things done late in the year, so um, it's not a problem for the next year. Um, so as has been kind of been talked about throughout this whole presentation, food is a huge part of the Samhain celebrations. In Ireland, brown back bread is popular. Um, this is part of the divination practices as well, where trinkets are baked into the bread to be able to tell the future. Kilcannon It is made with potatoes and cabbage or kale. Chump is just mashed potatoes and leeks or onions with melted butter. Boxty is potato pancakes. Fudge, which is sliced apples with potato cake and sprinkled with butter and sugar. Pumpkin pie is also popular, as well as mashed turnips. Um, Halloween suppers featured some kind of roast, fowl, or meat, although a lot of Irish food for Samhain is vegetarian or vegan. And slow cakes are also popular. These are similar to scones. So, getting into a little bit of the customs, dumb dinner is where people would leave food for ancestors or leave a place at the table for returning loved ones. Leaving nothing might anger the ancestors, and whoever ate the food that was left for the ancestors were barred from celebrations, so they wouldn't be able to participate in any of the festivities. And this also translated to once that person died, they wouldn't be able to come back and um, come to the veil. Um, as you saw, there were a lot of disguises and costumes that were popular. Um, um, Oftentimes, turnips were cut with scary faces, and a light was put inside. And this was we'll get into that a little bit later, but this became the precursor to jack lanterns. Um, People would sing songs for the dead, and as we saw before, bonfires were a huge part of it. Um, in many practices, the hearth fire was extinguished, and it was relit from the community bonfires. Um, and also, as mentioned, divination games gave information about marriage and death. Um, and there was also planking going on. One of the divination games is peeling an apple continuously, so it's one long peel. Um, and it would be tossed over your left shoulder, and when it fell to the ground, whatever letter the peel represented was the initial of the future love. A lot of the practices of Samhain were gendered, so the girls were more likely to do divination to predict the future love life, and the boys were more likely to um, participate in activities around fires and firecrackers. Um, at one point, there were crop and animal sacrifices that were born for various Celtic deities. In the 1400s, souling became popular. So souling was going door to door, offering to pray for dead relatives of the household, and as such, the people of that household would get soul cakes, which, as we mentioned, was similar to scones. Effigies of what people wanted to banish in the coming year were put out. Um, People would also leave notes for their ancestors to find. Um, and people also had a silent dinner to try to hear a lost loved one who may be trying to speak to them. By contrast, some people would also tell stories of lost loved ones or talk about their own lives so that the dead may hear what's happening in their lives and know that they are doing okay. A lot of times, food was left on the doorsteps um, for welcome or unwelcome spirits. Another kind of divination practice for telling the future luck was called pulling the kale. This could be done with kale or cabbage, where people would go out blindfolded into a kale yard or garden, and they would pull up the first stalk of kale that he or she would encounter. And the stalk is said to determine the future spouse. So the amount of earth on a stalk would reference the future mate's fortunate dowry. The taste of the core would reference the person's temper. If and the cabbage head um, appearance would uh, signify who a girl would marry. So if the cabbage head and closed and was white, the girl would marry a old man. And if it was a green head, the girl would marry a young man. In the past, there would be human sacrifice, which is no longer a thing, but they would sacrifice humans to Fomorians and um, to Kuata at Samhain, and this was said to placate the forces of blight and destruction and keep disaster at bay. But again, this is no longer a practice. Um, Samhain is a time of games and dancing and racing, and um, people would be known to spend the night at haunted places and ghost hunt, which is still practiced a lot today. Um, so as mentioned before, jack-lanterns were originally carved out of turnips. Um, and the legend of jack-lantern was that um, on the coast of Ireland, there was a man named Jack who would never repay his friends for money that was lent. Um, he was a trickster and he pranked and he told jokes. He wasn't the most honest person, and excuse me, he was known to drink all the drinks at parties and ate all the food at parties, and he would left without even saying goodbye or thank you. Um, but he was kept around because he was a good storyteller and musician. So one day, Jack and his friends were at a tavern, and a stranger walked in. And the stranger just so happened to be the devil. Um, and um, he told the devil that he should pay for the next round of drinks for him and his friends. And as such, Jack turned the devil into a coin. And instead of using the coin to pay for the drinks, he put the coin in his pocket and he had a cross with him. And he put the cross in front of the coin. Um, in ancient in beliefs, the cross would trap the devil. So since the cross was in front of the coin that was made from the devil was trapped in Jack's pocket. And as Jack was walking home, the coin fell out of his pocket, and obviously the devil was upset. But Jack, being who he is, he he really just laid on the compliment. He was really just buttering up the devil. Um, and eventually he was forgiven. Um, So Jack and the devil were on the way home, and they were gonna go to Jack's house for kind of an end of a night drink type thing, and um, they were hungry, and they just so happened to be walking by an apple trees or an apple orchard, and um, Jack thought it would be a good idea to um, pick apples so they could have a snack. So the devil climbed the apple tree and to pick the apples, and as he was doing so, Jack came up to the tree and carved the cross in the tree. Um, as mentioned, the cross would trap the devil, so the devil was unable to get down from the tree. Um, so the devil cursed Jack. Um, he wasn't able to get into heaven or hell. So he was destined to live in a candle until someone was able to accept his spirit. Um, and while he was trapped in a candle, Jack carved the face in a turnip and used that as a lantern until someone would accept his fate, accept him. Um, and that's how turnips became jack-o'-lanterns. Um, and now they are used by pumpkins, especially in the United States where they are native. Um, and Irish locals used the turnips to light up as lanterns to roam the streets to chase off evil spirits. Um, as mentioned, costumes were also very popular. Um, they were originally made from animal skins. Um, originally, people would dress up as ghosts. Um, this is kind of a two-pronged reasoning behind this. But because food was left after the spirits, people wanted to get kind of in on the action. They wanted to get food as well. So they would dress up as spirits to go out and get food. Um, but also the spirits that were out during this time, since the veil was so thin, the spirits would mistake those who were dressed as ghosts as other spirits, and they would be left alone. Um, today, children and adults alike dress as ghosts, witches, vampires, and skeletons. And a lot of the practices that took place throughout the Celtic nations um, were the precursor to trick or treating, um, where they would go door to door singing and dancing and get food, drink, and money. Um, and they would also perform plays for soul cakes. Um, these are some of my sources. Some of my sources.